All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening to join us in a presentation about standards-based learning at GAA. We had our first presentation on standards-based learning back in the spring for parents, and tonight is an opportunity for a more in-depth presentation where you can learn more about standards-based learning, what it is not, and why standards-based learning. And then we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers toward the end. Before we introduce our guest speaker for this evening, I would like to introduce our head of school, Dr. Kathy Miner, who's going to talk with you about how our vision and mission really support the work that we're doing here at GAA with standards-based learning.
Thank you for joining us here this evening. We're excited to host our guest speaker this evening. He's here to speak on a shift that's happening in education internationally and back in the United States and North America amongst a number of schools. And we're making that shift here at GAA, and it's about adapting to the changing needs of students and the changing context of education. And you'll learn more about that tonight. Our mission and vision, I'd like to draw your attention to that. These are our guiding statements as a school. It's like the, true north, if you will. And everything in our school is really aligned under these important guiding statements. And so the mission of our school is that we're a diverse and caring international learning community offering a rigorous, relevant, and holistic education. And these are very well chosen words, carefully chosen. And think of the word relevance in education today. We want to make sure that students are learning the skills and the knowledge, the critical thinking skills, that they will need, not only today in university, but in the future in future jobs. I learned recently that there's a major in universities, blockchain technology is now a major, right? Jobs that didn't exist how many years ago? Certainly not when we were in school. So we're preparing kids for an uncertain and exciting, different world, right? And so we need to be able to adapt to that, okay? We develop global citizens who have the confidence and conviction to pursue their dreams and impact the world. So it's not only about academic competence, but it's about having the confidence and the conviction to impact the world, to make a change in the future. And so we're here tonight to talk about how we can do that as a school and support our students in the changing context of education and the world. So I think we're ready to begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miner. Again, before I introduce our guest speaker, I want to quickly give you an overview of what has led us here tonight to this moment in time where we are engaged in the work of standards-based learning at GAA. So in 2016, there was a conversation that happened among several of our teacher leaders, our department chairs, and it went something like this. Can you define an A, B, and a C? I hear giggles here. We did that with 13 teacher leaders, and we got 13 different responses. And there was a lot of, oh my. And that led to further conversations and deeper dialogue about what is learning. What are the standards we're teaching? How are we sure we're assessing those standards? How are we reporting those to parents? How do parents know if they have 2 children in our division and they have 16 different teachers with 16 different versions of what an A, B, or C is? Oh my. And so this led to a lot of other conversations. And we decided that as a division, we needed to hit this head on And I think that the greatest thing that came out of those conversations were discussions about learning, about deep learning, and what that is, and how we do that as teachers, how we facilitate that with our students. And so in 1617, the faculty read a book called Grading from the Inside Out by Tom Schimmer. And it was all about standards-based grading, assessment, reporting, learning. From there, the following year, we started doing some professional development with our teachers, and we developed what we call our true north, our ideas about student learning. You know, we want to make sure that we instill hope in students with our grades and our reporting. We want them to be confident learners. We want them to be prepared for the world that they're going into. And nothing can crush a student like a big fat F or D. We should be about instilling hope and confidence in our kids. So we developed that true north in 2017-18 about our collective beliefs about learning. From there, we piloted a classroom of standards-based learning. Our teachers continued working on developing assessments and developing rubrics to assess the standards that they were teaching. And we also worked strategically and intentionally with our students so that they began to understand what is a rubric, how is it assessing my learning, and how do I become engaged and responsible for my learning, so that they know exactly where they are in their own learning journey, which is unique and different to every child. And then this year, we began implementing standards-based learning in all of our classrooms. We've developed a standards-based report card, which you'll learn more about if you come back on October 9th, and we go through that. So that's a little bit about the journey that we have taken as a staff in the secondary division to bring us here tonight so that we can talk with you about standards-based learning. Now, tonight, we are going to learn what it is and why we're doing that, and then October 9th, you'll have an opportunity to come back and learn about the Power Schools student portal, etc., that will go into more detail about how we report on standards-based learning. So joining us tonight is Dr. Tom Guskey, Professor Emeritus of the College of Education at the University of Kentucky in the U.S. Dr. Guskey began his career as a middle school teacher and served as an administrator in the Chicago Public Schools, and was the first director for the Center for Improvement of Teaching and Learning, a U.S. national research center. Dr. Guskey is the author of 24 award-winning books and numerous articles and professional papers on educational measurement, evaluation, assessment, grading, and professional learning. His articles journals, including, among others, American Educational Research Journal, Education Week, Educational Leadership, one of my favorites, and the Review of Educational Research. Dr. Guskey has received numerous awards for the work that he has done, and in recognition of his contributions, he has been the recipient of a number of prestigious awards. His work is dedicated really to helping teachers and school leaders use quality educational research to help all of their students learn well and gain the many valuable benefits of that success. So it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Tom Guskey to GAA this evening.
And thank you for coming tonight. I know this disrupts your evening, but we're really glad that you took time from you to be a part of our session tonight. I wanted to start by actually sharing with you some contact information for me. And here's some of the ways you can get in touch with me. So if there are questions that tonight's discussion prompts, or if you have further things that I can help with in any of this regard, I hope you won't hesitate to get in touch with me. I do have a website. It's just tguskey.com. If you log on to that, you'll find articles and blogs and different things you can download. especially on the topic of grading, might be helpful to you. That's my email address at the university. I'm professor of education psychology at the University of Kentucky. You can contact me there. Those of you who follow Twitter can contact me through Twitter in that way. And then that's my telephone number. But if you call that number, there's a phone in this bag up here that's going to ring. So it's not as though you need to go through a lot of people to get to me. I also wanted to share with you a bit of my background in education because it's not traditional in any way at all. I was not trained initially as a teacher. My undergraduate major actually was physics and electrical engineering. But I graduated from college with my degree in that area to discover that I had no talent in that field at all, which was a terrible disappointment to my father, who was an engineer. And I was at a party one night, which I did a lot at that time, talking to a friend who told me about this private school that needed a middle grade math teacher who would also coach. And this happened to be the third week of August. So I went and applied for the job and they hired me. Because my father, to this day, claims the only reason I was hired is I passed the mirror test. They put a mirror under my nose, it fogged, and so I got the job. Because it was the third week of August, they needed a middle school math teacher who would coach. But I began teaching middle school, grades 7 and 8, and I just fell in love with it. I know a lot of people struggle with that age of kids. They're totally confused, but it's a great age to work with. And so I worked, I gained my certification. I began then going to graduate school to learn how to become a better teacher. Did my doctorate at the University of Chicago, began working with Chicago public schools, and moved to a university position. So I don't come to this in any traditional way at all. I've always been fascinated, though, by the area of grading. And my fascination began in my very first year as a teacher. In the school where I taught, it was our custom, even though we were middle school, to give final examinations to our 8th grade students. We thought this was a good way to prepare them for what they were going to face in high school. I remember the first year doing this, because I prepared my final exam and I was standing outside my classroom doors. My students were coming in, greeting them as I normally did. And I had one student who was just brilliant. Her name was Jessica, and Jessica had done everything so well over the entire school year. And as Jessica came down the hall, I said, "Hi, Jess, how are you today?" She said, "Fine, Mr. Guskey, how are you?" I said, "Jess, did you study for your exam?" She said, "No, not really." I was shocked. I said, "Jess, I don't understand. How could you not study for your final exam? This is a really important part of your grade." And she looked at me really quizzically and she said, "Well, Mr. Guskey, I worked it out. I only need a 51% to get my A. I don't have to study to get a 51%. This 8th grader had worked it out to the decimal place, what she needed to do to get her A in my class, and she was surprised that I didn't get it. And that turned me around completely with this topic of grading. Because I realized that for Jessica, this brilliant young woman, learning in school was not about what she'd achieved. It was about getting a grade, and she had done her job. And she was surprised that I didn't know that it was that way. So, in the time we have available, there are 3 things tonight that I'd like to share with you just fairly briefly. I'd like to describe for you a little bit about the history of grading. We have an amazing history of research in this area that many of us, even those in education, really don't know. We have a lot of understanding about this area that just hasn't found its way into practice. I'd like to share with you some of the advantages and shortcomings of different grading methods, talk about what's being done here in the school and the advantages of that and other grading methods that you probably have experienced and what we know about those as well. And finally, we talk about the importance of basing grades on learning criteria instead of the normative criteria that many of us experience, and particularly as we move toward a standards-based approach, as is being done here in the school. We also want to provide some time before we end tonight to address questions and concerns you might have. So keep in mind we do have that in plan too. So with that in mind, some more we know about grading report. The first thing we know is that we do have a really long history of research in this area. When I first began investigating this, I was surprised to find out how much we know, how long we've known it, and how little of that has found its way into our practice today. I mean, throughout the world, we have an amazing knowledge base on grading that's just not finding its way into practice. Let me give you an example. I found this study that was conducted by these two researchers. Their names were Starch and Elliott, and they were concerned about teacher subjectivity in grading. Now, we know that's always been a problem, but here's the way they chose to investigate it. Starch and Elliott took two compositions that had been prepared by students. They made copies, and they sent those compositions to 200 high school English language arts teachers. And these were the directions. They asked the teachers to assume that these papers came from their students and grade them according to whatever criteria they would use in their classes. They got the papers back from the 200 teachers and found the grades were all over the place. I mean, just all over. About 15% of the teachers gave the papers a grade of A, the highest grade possible, but a comparable number gave failing grades to exactly the same papers. There was every grade in between. On the first paper, percentage grades ranged from 64 to 98, and the second paper they ranged from 50 to 97. So Starch and Elliott published their study. But as soon as their study came out, people criticized them. And they said, well, first of all, you chose writing. Writing's a very subjective judgment in the first place. Not everybody agrees on what good writing is, so you stack the odds in your favor. Second, you chose high school English language arts teachers. Everybody knows they're a crazy lot, and you can't trust them anyway, so why would you expect any different results? So what Starch and Elliott did is they took two math papers and repeated the exact same study. They sent these math papers to 200 high school math teachers, the same identical directions. Assume they came from your students, grade them accordingly. They got the papers back from math teachers and found greater variation in the grading of the math teachers than they did the English language art teachers. Now, how could that be? Well, some of the math teachers just counted correct answers because they believed that's what students would have to do when they took these large-scale, high-stakes assessments. But many of the math teachers gave partial credit. How they gave the partial credit, though, varied drastically. Some took offer labels, some did not. The grades were all over. Now, I doubt if that surprises you very much. From the dilemmas we're going through today, trying to have teachers grade more authentic assessments and portfolios and demonstrations of learning, it probably sounds familiar. What I think will surprise you is to learn when Starch and Elliott published their study. Let me give you a hint. The Starch and Elliott study was published the same year the Titanic sank. They published their study in 1912. We've known about this for a long time. And I know what you're thinking. You know, Tom, we've come so far. We can do it so much better today than we could over 100 years ago. Well, there was another researcher by the name of Brimmy who decided to find out if that was the case. So what Brimmy did was he took the same composition that Starch and Elliott had used. He made copies and he sent that to 100 high school English language arts teachers. With this difference, all of the teachers in Brimmy's study had actually been trained in the traits of writing. They had been trained on how to grade writing samples. The results they got were identical to what Starch and Elliott had found. The scores ranged from 50 to 96. Brimmy's study published 2011. In 100 years, we haven't come so far. Which leads me to this next point. How do teachers choose their grading methods? If we have this amazing research base that's not being used, then what is being used? And what I'd like you to do is just turn to the people beside you, they're sitting near you, and take a guess. How do you think teachers come up with the grading policies they use in their classes today? Of all the different resources available, how do you think they decide the way they're going to grade their students when they begin teaching? Maybe just 1 minute. Talk to the people near you about how you think most teachers do it today. Okay, have some ideas? Well, one of the great advantages of my job is that I get paid to ask interesting questions and then try to find answers to those. And we actually did a study where we posed that question to over 500 teachers. We asked them, how did you come up with your grading policies? And what we discovered is this: there's not a lot in the background of most teachers today that gives them any idea how to do it. They don't really learn about grading as they're preparing to become teachers in their undergraduate programs. They don't talk about grading in graduate programs, even in terms of professional learning experiences teachers have. So what happens is this: most teachers become teachers, they find they have to do it, and most of them reflect back what was done to them. And from what was done to them, they think of all the different practices and policies they experience. They try to pick those they think are fair, equitable, and educationally sound. The problem most teachers have is this: they often reflect back on what was done to them most recently. And what was done to them most recently was done to them by college and university professors. If there is any level of education at all where almost everything we do in grading is totally evil and corrupt, it is the college university level, right? But what we also discovered is that often teachers try to do too much with a single reporting device, like a report card. And that's always a mistake. That when you think about grading and reporting, we need to consider all the different devices available to educators that they can communicate with parents and families about student learning progress. So that's why we always recommend, don't just think about the report card, but think about all of these different devices. Think about email messages. Think about parent-teacher conferences, student-led conferences, all the different devices in an entire reporting system. Now, when you think about a system, most schools throughout the world today purchase a grading system. The grading system used here is called PowerSchool. It is the most commonly used grading system in international schools throughout the world today. All grading systems have 3 different elements that as parents you should know about. And here they are. They all include a grade book, a report card, and a permanent record or transcript. The grade book is that ongoing record. It is all the information teachers gather on sometimes a daily basis on students. It's where they can record quiz results, major examinations, project scores, demonstrations, homework, class behaviors. All those things are recorded in the grade book. We're going to call the information the teachers put in the grade book to be scores. And you can see that it is this ongoing record of performance, and in most of the programs available today, students and families have access to that information, and you do as well. In addition to that, there are these report cards. Report cards are interim reports. The most common interim we use in schools throughout the world today is quarterly, and we're going to call the information that goes in the report card grades. Now, grades can be numbers, letters, symbols, words, anything at all. We're just going to call that whole collection of things grades. And those are interim summaries of performance. And those are available to you as well. And then we have the permanent record, the transcript. And this is the record that follows students in the elementary grades and through high school, from school to school, if they change schools. It's also going to be the record that is sent to colleges and universities as part of the college admission process. Third parties have access to this information. It makes them distinctly different from these other 2 elements because of the third-party access. And we'll talk about that. The information that goes into that we're going to call the summary grades, and those are typically descriptions of a summative assessment of students over the course of a school year. Now, what we do with grades always depends on its purpose. And so that's why the staff here has been engaged in this really dedicated effort to be clear about the purpose of grading. Because it's purpose that always dictates to you what method is going to work best. And suppose that we did go through this process and we engaged in a really thoughtful discussion about what we believe the purpose of a grade should be. And after that discussion, we came down to this, that we felt that they should accurately and meaningfully describe student performance. Sound reasonable? So, if that is our purpose, then what we need to do is think about the different grading methods and how they describe and fit that purpose well. So let me quickly describe for you the 4 most common grading methods used throughout the world today and how they match their advantages and shortcomings with regard to this particular purpose. The first, of course, are letter grades. Letter grades are the most common grading practice used throughout the world today. In the United States and Canada, letter grades are used in 87% of schools in North America, right? They are used in slightly fewer middle schools and elementary schools, but slightly more colleges and universities in North America. And you see, letter grades are just labels attached to these categories of performance. We began with this idea of A, B, C, D, and E. That was initiated around the 1920s and 1930s. And then somewhere around the 1960s, in the 1970s, we're not sure exactly why, but there was this question about what the E really meant. Some people have attributed to the student activist movement at that time that apparently some students were able to convince their parents that E actually meant excellent. And so we changed the letter grade system from A, B, C, D, E to A, B, C, D, F, because F was unmistakably failure. It is kind of odd because none of the other letter grades stand for anything, but we wanted to make sure that F had some meaning. They do provide a brief description of adequacy of student performance, generally understood. Most people think they understand letter grades. But again, they do require the integration of all this diverse information into a single symbol, which can make interpreting a symbol very difficult. The cutoffs between the grade categories are arbitrary. I will show you in just a minute some examples of how arbitrary that decision is, and the most easily misunderstood. Now, in some cases, we argue about whether we should have letter grades, and there's a movement throughout the world now that we should actually abandon letter grades. We need to get rid of them. And in many cases, they're moving from letter grades to a different category description. In the state where I live, in the U.S., this was a very prominent movement. We decided, especially at the elementary level, there should not be any letter grades. We felt that put kids into these categories, and that was really detrimental to their progress. And so we abandoned letter grades, and most of the teachers use a category system that is similar to what's used in our state assessment. We have an assessment system in the state that classifies student performance at 1 and 4 levels. So on the state assessment, students can score 1, 2, 3, 4, and we label those novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. And that sounds great. But 2 years after implementation, we interviewed parents, and we found that every parent we interviewed translated that directly. Distinguished is an A, proficient is a B. We did nothing. Changing labels does not change the interpretation. Now, sometimes we take this to one further extreme. At my university, 3 years ago, we went through a nasty debate on grading. It was downright ugly. It broke up friendships that endured for years. It was the topic of editorials in our newspaper for weeks. And the essence of the debate was whether we, as a faculty, are going to give plus or minus grades. Oh, it was ugly. And at one point, I was actually subpoenaed to appear before our university senate. Someone here did some research on grading, and so I got the subpoena. You were required to appear. And I thought, a subpoena? Really? I mean, you could have called. You know, it's not that I wouldn't come. And so I went before the Senate. They said, Professor Guskey, what do you think of that idea of plus or minus grades? And I told them this. I said, to be honest, it's a much simpler issue than you have been debating. It is. It comes down to this. Do you want to have a 5-category system, or do you want to have a 12-category system? That's it, 5 or 12. And if you think more is better, why stop at 12? You don't need to stop at 12. Let's consider grade point, GPA. Just go to the 10th place, 0 to 4.0. That gives you 41 categories. If you don't like that, how about percentages? 0 to 100, 101 categories. But do you know what happens when you increase the number of grade categories? The influence of teacher subjectivity on the grade goes way up. And what that means is a chance of 2 equally competent judges looking at exactly the same body of evidence and coming up with exactly the same grade drops drastically. And I also share with them, In K through 12 education in the state where I live, where we have very clearly defined learner goals, which few university professors have, we have a well-refined student assessment system, which no university professor has. We train people to evaluate the assessments. We sometimes have trouble getting them to agree in just 4 categories. They think they could do it in 12? Not a chance. Not a chance. Significant research evidence shows once you move beyond 5, 6 categories at most, human beings cannot make that fine discrimination. And people say, well, hold up, what about the IB scale? We got 1 through 7. And I say, yeah, we do, but really, if your students are doing IB, nobody doing IB gets a 1 or 2, right? We really don't. The basic IB scale goes from 3 to 7 in most instances. It's the same, which is a good scale to use. We can do with that level. 12, much more questionable. But we remain undaunted. In many places, we move to percentage grades. And why do we have percentage grades? Well, it is kind of odd because if you remember back to those Starch and Elliott experiments where they asked people to assign percentage grades, they found it was almost impossible to get any agreement on teachers. That many levels of performance, a scale that had 101 discrete levels of performance, was very difficult to get any agreement among judges, and we abandoned it. And we continued to abandon it. In the 1920s and 1930s, that's when the letter grade system came about. And we stayed away from from percentage grades until we hit around the late 1980s and 1990s because we started to use computers with grading. And the people who developed software grading programs were not really education experts, they were software engineers, and they lacked percentages. So we see this return to percentages with the use of computerized grading programs. Of all the grading systems we have available, the one that is hardest to defend from a practical, ethical, or educational perspective is a percentage grade system. There are so many problems with it. And let me outline just a few for you. First, it has to do with the scale itself. If you think about letter grades, we've got the 5 letter grades, A, B, C, D, and F. We've got 4 levels of passing, we have 1 level of failure. That communicates as educators we are 4 times better at distinguishing levels of passing as we are levels of failure. Are you with me so far? Watch what happens when you move to percentages. The scale flips. Now I have a scale 2/3 of which to note levels of failure. This communicates as educators we are twice as good at identifying levels of failure as we are levels of passing. Really? Do we need 65, 70 levels of failure? Has any student ever questioned a teacher about the level of failure they achieved? Can you imagine a kid coming up to a teacher and saying, you gave me a 42, I think I deserve a 45? Right? No, we don't need that many levels of failure. And plus, then we make these things of trying to apply percentage to performance and setting cutoffs accordingly, and it always becomes problematic. We've always had this idea, for example, that 80% means mastery. You just get 80%. 80% is mastery, just get to 80%. Well, first of all, it kind of depends on the standard itself, what you're shooting for. I mean, would 80% be sufficient if you were teaching children to cross the street safely, right? Maybe not. You might want something a little better than 80%, right? How about if you were teaching children to be honest? Would you accept from a kid, today it's Wednesday, it's my day to lie to you. The rest of the week I'll be honest, but this is my day off, right? No, it doesn't work that way. What if you were teaching a pilot how to land a plane safely? Would 80% be good enough? Would you get on a plane where the pilot was successful only 80% of the time, bringing that jet down safely? Would you want students leaving the high school shop with 80% of the fingers with which they entered? Right? No, it doesn't work. But there are other cases where 80% could be really remarkable performance. I mean, how many of you are soccer football fans? Right? Consider corner kicks resulting in goals. In World Cup soccer, you know what percent of corner kicks, and corner kicks are the best way to score actually, you know what percent of corner kicks actually result in goals in World Cup soccer? 3.5%. 3.5%, that's remarkable. These are the best in the world. 3.5%. How many of you are basketball fans? Right? One of the greatest basketball players of all time was probably Michael Jordan. You know, Michael Jordan's success rate was shooting from floor 49.7. 49.7. Half the time he put it up, it went in. That was remarkable. That was remarkable performance. Have any baseball fans? Do you know if a Major League Baseball player gets a hit 1/3 the times they step to the plate, that would rank them among the very best hitters in all of professional baseball in the entire world. Right? Applying percentages to performance often don't work. And not only that, it kind of depends on the assessment itself. I can design assessments in lots of different ways. Now, I can design an assessment that can be very challenging. I can design an assessment that can be very easy, testing exactly the same concepts. It's all absolutely arbitrary. I'm going to share with you an example that's taken from an American context, and so it's sort of out of place for many of you. But suppose I wanted to test a pretty simple concept dealing with the U.S. history and knowledge of U.S. presidents. I could formulate my assessment in lots of different ways. Suppose I formulated using what we call open-ended constructed response items. We used to call them essay questions. Here's an example. Who is the 17th president of the United States? Now, do you know, if I pose this question in this format to students in the United States today, less than 10% can answer it correctly. Now, less than 10%, it's a classic example of very low-level questions, extremely difficult. See, people think because it's low-level, it should be easy. Not necessarily so. Right? It's extremely difficult. Now, what I could do, though, instead, is I could change the format of the question. Suppose instead of open-ended, I made it multiple choice. Who is 17th President of the United States? Now, if I ask it in this format, success rate goes from 10% to 30%. I've tripled the success rate on the item just by changing the format of the question. Now, they're all male, they're all were U.S. presidents, but they're very close historically. So it's still a pretty challenging item. But it's multiple choice. There are 4 options. 25% would get it right by guessing. 30% isn't that great. But I've tripled the success rate in the item. I can change it once more. If I ask the question in this format, success rate climbs to 60%. And we might assume that if you couldn't answer it correctly now, separating these historically, right, that you don't know a lot about U.S. presidents. And I could even change it once more. Under the format, the success rate climbs to about 95%. Answer D throws off a few students. We're not sure quite why. But here's the point. I can construct assessment using items of any of these 4 types. Would it be fair for me to say cut off our grades on those 4 assessments at exactly the same point? Not at all. They pose very different challenges to students. And do you know who controls that? I do. I control that completely. I am the god of grading in my class. I can make that assessment as easy or as challenging as I want it to be. It's absolutely arbitrary. And that's why we really need to more grade in terms of rubrics instead of percentages or number cutoffs. Reasonable levels of expectation for performance that we can really distinguish. That leads me then to the standards-based because it's moving us in that direction. With standards-based, you can see we take a single subject here and we break it down into various components because you don't just learn math, you learn different aspects of math. You learn problem solving, you learn basic computations, you learn geometric principles, you learn algebraic expressions, you know all these different aspects of it, and to break it down in that way becomes a lot more meaningful. But it does involve extra work for the teachers and may not be supported by the gradebook. One of the challenges teachers here are facing is how to make Power School work as we move toward this standards-based approach. And they're working really diligently to pull that out. But the whole idea is communicating better information to you as parents. So you know, not just a math score, but how the kids are doing in math. And what aspects are they doing well and where might they be struggling? If we want to intervene, if we want to provide some assistance, where can we do it and really have it be targeted? Now, one of the problems is how we label these levels of performance. And here's some of the categories that are chosen in standards-based reporting. You can see 4 becomes the the major number, for some reason, for levels of performance seems to be identifiable. We've done this at my university. My university uses a strictly letter-based system, A, B, C, D, and F, but recently we've changed. We've dropped the D grade. The D was always a gentleman's F anyway, so we've just gotten rid of it. And so we have A, B, C, and F. Now, we've gone to 4 levels, but this is the way we label them. Now, not all these labels are equally important, however, because they're designed to be communication devices. So what we did in another study recently, we presented this to parents and we asked them, which do you like? Are there any here that are particularly meaningful to you to describe levels of performance? Unfortunately, nothing came out on top. But then we asked another question. Are there any that you don't like? Are there any that don't have meaning, that you find particularly confusing? And there were some real losers. I will give you 1 minute to see if you can pick out the losers on this list. There were 2 in particular that the parents we surveyed told us they found did not communicate adequately or were particularly confusing. So, 1 minute, what do you think? So any guesses? Gonna shout them out? Pre-emergent? All right, what? The last 2 on the bottom. Over here, sufficient evidence and extensive evidence? Oh yeah, Ida Beckman. Well, actually, you got it right. I mean, the first that the parents said they didn't like was pre-emergent and emerging. Right? Over and over again, parents question us about that. When we use the word emerging, they had a vision of a slimy creature crawling out of a swamp, right? Emerging literacy meant the creature was carrying books. Over and over, parents question about emerging. Our response was, emerging means beginning. And their response was, if you meant beginning, just say beginning. That's a really valid comment. The other one that parents did not like was exceeds. Over and over, parents told us they could understand how you could have specific criteria, how you could identify what outstanding, distinguished, exemplary meant. But exceeds, it's more than we expect, but we cannot tell you what it is. It's out there somewhere. We think we're going to know it when we see it, but we just can't tell you at a time. Right? It lacks that communicative value. And so, as educators are moving this direction, they're always considering, is it communicating the message that we want? And that brings us to the narratives, the written descriptions of student work. And you can see that this can offer a clear description of achievement can be used without a prescription, but it's very time-consuming for teachers to develop these, and it may not communicate the appropriateness of progress. Comments do sometimes become standardized. The best report cards actually don't isolate any one of these methods, they combine the methods. And you'll see Power School giving you a combination of methods that are available to you. And the school here is working to find the best combination that would do the best job of communicating to you adequately how your kids are doing in school. Which leads me to the last point I want to share with you. That what we found about grading, and this is probably better established than anything else we know, we need to grade students according to learning criteria, not according to normative criteria. Now this is a big transition for us as parents, because many of us grew up in schools where we were graded according to how we compared to our classmates. That's a normative. Grading according to learning criteria is something very different. When you're graded according to your standing among classmates, we know there are lots of negative consequences associated with it. In particular, it tells you nothing about learning. Everybody in the class could have done miserably. It's just some that are less miserably than others. Right? Makes learning highly competitive. If you are graded according to your standing among classmates, it doesn't matter how well you do, it matters how well the rest of the class does. And because of that, you're competing against everybody else in the class for the few scarce high grades. That actually discourages student collaboration, because helping another student be successful hurts your chances for success. And it actually alters the relationship with teachers, because as soon as a teacher helps one kid, you're intervening in that competition. Think back, how many of you at one time in your life were in a class where you were graded according to your standing among classmates? We call it grading on the curve. Anybody have that experience? Right? Remember how you felt? Remember how you hated those students that got the highest scores because they blew off the curve? Or maybe you were the one the rest of us hated? Right? We shouldn't be fostering hatred, right? And think of it like this. If we are all in a class where we are going to be graded on the curve and we take a test, do you know what I hope for you? I hope you fail, because that enhances my chances for success. Would I help anybody be successful? It hurts me? No. If you grade according to criteria, all those things change. Now, you're actually describing student learning. You're identifying what's been learned well and what hasn't, and maybe what you need to do about it. It actually, the kids are competing, but they're competing against a rigorous and challenging curriculum, not against each other. That's a good kind of competition. That it encourages student collaboration, because now helping someone else doesn't hurt your chance of success. It might even enhance it, because if you can explain it to someone else, you have to learn it and know it really, really well. And actually, it puts teachers and students on the same side. All we're setting out to do this. Now, some people worry if we do this, we're not adequately addressing what college universities are looking for. Well, I always encourage folks to look at an organization. It's called the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. Every year they do a survey of the most selective schools throughout North America. And they ask them, what criteria are they using to grant admission and to grant fellowships or scholarship money? This is the list. You can see the most recent list that was published this year. Now, I've been following this for about 10 years now, looking at what's going up and what's going down. And you see what tops the list now are the grades students get in challenging classes. They want to know how many IP classes have they taken, how many AP classes have they taken, how many IP exams have they taken, right? What's the highest level of math they studied, and what did you take your senior year? A lot of the universities in the United States have abandoned the process of what they call early admission, where kids could apply early and get in. They've abandoned it because they found when they granted it, kids took off their senior year. They weren't prepared for the rigors that were. If you want your kids to get into the most selective universities in the world, have them take the most challenging program this school has to offer. That's what leads the list. Now, what I have found interesting in following this for 10 years is what's going up and what's going down. What's going down is class rank. Class rank is dropped every year. Next year it's going to be out of the top 10, maybe out of the top 15, because universities recognize that high schools differ so drastically. And because they differ so drastically, comparing kids to one another within the school doesn't make a lot of sense. At this school, you've got a very select student population. And the school is known among college admissions people because of the rigor of the program that's done. And so to be ranked in the middle of this school's class is still to do really, really well. Many of these powerhouse high schools throughout the world are dropping the notion of class rank. It used to be something the schools included on their diplomas, but they're dropping it because they found that it hurt some kids in the application process. What's going up, quite to my surprise, are teacher letters of recommendation. And the reason those things are going up is that college universities are looking for things other than just academic achievement. They want to know, can your child collaborate with others? Are they cooperative? Do they have problem-solving skills? Now, the approaches to learning that are actually used here in the school are exactly the kind of information college universities are looking for. This is a really positive development moving in that direction. The reason letters of recommendation are moving up is because in most schools throughout the world, that's the only place they get that evidence. That's the only place they can find out, is this a student of integrity? Is this a student of honor? Is this a student who persists, who tries hard? Is this a student who has a sense of responsibility? When those are included, as they are here in the approaches to learning, it's going to be advantageous to your students getting into those selective universities. We always have to grade according to criteria, but the challenge isn't over yet. We find there are 3 different types that teachers use. And we've labeled them product, process, and progress. Here's what they mean. Product criteria are those culminating demonstrations of achievement. We don't worry about how students got there, we worry about what they've learned and they're able to do. Process are behaviors that enable learning. And these can be the approaches, but they can also be like homework. Homework really doesn't reflect learning, but it's a process that helps you learn. Class participation, responsibility in the class, all those are process. And finally, we have progress. With progress criteria, you worry about not where they are, but how far they've come. Sometimes it's referred to as improvement grading, value added grading, or gain grading. All three are important. The problem becomes if all three are combined into a single grade. This happens at schools throughout the world, because as soon as you do that, the grade becomes meaningless. Suppose that I took a measure of your height in centimeters, your weight in kilograms, your average calorie intake per day, and number of minutes you spend exercising each day, and I combine those four things into one grade that represented your physical condition. You would say to me, that's a really dumb idea. I mean, how can you do that? They measure such different things. But every day in schools throughout the world, teachers take evidence on achievement, behavior, responsibility, punctuality, and turning in assignments, combine them all in a single grade. Doesn't make sense, right? The direction this school has chosen to separate those and have the approaches to learning reported separately is exactly the way to go. It brings honesty and meaningfulness to the grades. And so that's the key. If you're going to report these things, do report them, but keep them separate. And that way, the grade actually has meaning. It gives you as parents, too, a way that you can intervene in the process if your child is having difficulties. Because while the achievement things are broken down into components, the approaches to learning give you these behaviors that enable learning and where you might want to attend. Make sense? So, the bottom line is this, for better practice. First thing, you got to begin with a statement of purpose. All schools, if they're going to make progress, have to be clear about what it is they're doing, especially with the report card. We actually recommend, even if you're using Power School, to put a statement of purpose at the top. Why are we doing it? For information intended, what do you want the results to be? Finally, next, you want to provide accurate and meaningful description of the student learning. That when it comes to grading, especially reporting, it's much more challenging and effective communication than it's just documenting or quantifying achievement. Machines can do the first part. They can do the quantifying. They can't do the communicating part. And that's where the work that the school here is doing to move in this direction is really based on more effective communication with you, with parents and families, to find out how the kids are doing in school. And finally, you want to make sure that it enhances teaching and learning, not getting in the way. Some of the things that teachers have done in the past do get in the way. Grading on the curve, grading according to your classmates, gets in the way. We find that's detrimental to the learning progress of most kids. But grading according to criteria can be really advantageous to you. So, what I've tried to do is give you a real quick summary of some of the really important points with regard to grading. We want to take some time to address questions and concerns you might have. Are there any? Are there things about grading? And I can't promise I have answers to them, but it is my job to try to understand this field pretty well. I know what evidence exists and maybe some of the things we don't know about too, that a chair welcome the opportunity to share. Yes?
You described clearly how it's useful to have a criteria with learning goals and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But then shouldn't feedback to the students help them accomplish those goals?
Yes. In fact, one of the reasons that the school has invited me is to address that issue directly. That just going over the test and telling kids what's right or wrong doesn't help. And it's really the teacher's responsibility to provide guidance and direction to students as to how they can improve. That's a really neglected aspect of that feedback component, and it's not only the case here, it's true in schools throughout the world. We've missed that part of it. And the idea is that not only does it have to be there, it has to be teacher-directed. The teacher needs to take class time to engage kids in those, what we call corrective opportunities. That kids learn things in different ways. And maybe the way I taught it worked real well for some kids, but for some it didn't. So as a teacher, I have to provide another option, another alternative. I have to help students see it another way. And one of the things we'll be working with teachers to do in the next couple of days is exactly that. How to use assessment results better to steer students in the direction they can use to communicate and to remedy any problems that they're having. Yes?
Are there many schools adopting this grading system?
Are there many schools using this?
Yeah.
The idea of separating those three criteria, the product, process, and progress, is taking place throughout the world. If you look at schools in Northern Europe, for example.
What about here in Abu Dhabi? Is this the first school to change?
I don't know exactly what all the other schools are doing here in Abu Dhabi. Among the international school community, I know that it's taking place in several. The separation of those things, yes. And that's true among the international schools throughout the world. The region of the world...
Incentives, like it's very vague. It's changing something that we've all had since feels like the dawn of time. It's a big thing to sit as a parent and have changed if the rest of schools internationally aren't moving forward also.
Right. I cannot give you specific numbers for the schools that are moving in this direction.
I can certainly speak up about some of the schools around here. ACS, the American Community School, has adopted it. ASA, American International School of Abu Dhabi, has also adopted it. DAA up in Dubai has adopted it. Several other schools, international schools up in Dubai, have adopted it as well. I'm sorry, I don't have them all memorized. We do have several schools, American international schools throughout the world. And later when you leave, we do have a frequently asked question book that states, I think, like 10 different ones, but it's not the entire list, because that would probably need its own brochure in itself to list all the schools. Yeah, and then you could probably speak to all the schools in the U.S. There's quite a few, and entire districts.
If the children move schools,
Pardon me?
if the children move schools and they're not adopting this system, how does the report get integrated into all of a sudden change?
Oh, it's much easier to go from a school that uses this to a school that doesn't. Because what you're doing with this is giving more information.
Okay.
You can always take more information and reduce it. Take reduced information, trying to broaden it is a challenge. And so that's the steps that are being taken here. Now, I can tell you that because, here the Gentlemen's American Academy was the first to contact me about coming to work with this. But I'm going to be working with the school here. I go from here to Dubai to work with 2 different schools there. Then I go to Kuwait City to work with the school, international schools there. So in this particular region, it's growing. And one of the reasons it's growing is because of its growing acceptance and actually advantage in the admissions process for college universities. If you're interested, if you log on to my website, there's a section there on reports. And under reports, there are about 7 or 8 different reports that have been done where they have surveyed admissions officers, asking them specifically about the kind of changes in transcripts and report cards that are being conducted here. And you'll see that all of them find it very advantageous. It gives them more information in the admission process than they have presently. And what admissions people have to do is make decisions about students very quickly. One of the reports is a report from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And at MIT, they received 20,000 applicants for an entering freshman class of just over 1,000. The average amount of time they spend looking at an application is 6 minutes, because they have 20,000 of them. They have limited staff to do it. So they have to make decisions very quickly. The more information you can get that's easy to interpret, the better it is for the kids. And the other thing they like about this is that by pulling out those non-achievement factors, that exactly what's being done here with the approaches to learning, what it does is there's a better relationship between the course grades kids are getting and the grades they get on external exams. That when those are aligned, the admissions people find it very advantageous. What troubles them is when they don't align. When the kids are getting high grades in their classes, but then they're getting low grades on the external exams. And why they get the high grades? Well, because the grades are inflated. The kids did things, the extra credit projects, and they took advantage of different things the teacher was offering, or they turned in all their assignments in time, or their grades are deflated because they didn't do their homework, or they didn't turn in something on time. And all those things, if those things affect the grades, then it doesn't really reflect achievement. I tell the story of my son. I have a son who's very bright. I like to think he got it from me. He's also very obstinate, though, and he definitely got that from his mother. So in high school, we fought a battle because he would come to me and he would say, "You're an educator, right? Right?" He said, "Okay, homework. Homework is designed to provide you with extended practice of things you get in class, right?" I say, "Yeah, that's right." He says, "Well, if I get it in class and I can show the teacher I've got it, why should I have to do this stupid homework?" He said, "If I go to class and all the teacher really does is goes over what's in the book and I can read the book and get it, why should I have to go to class?" This kid would not do homework. He would skip class. He wouldn't leave school. They just find him in tech lab doing something he thought was more important. Right? So in high school, he takes advanced placement calculus. Right? The first year, he took advanced placement calculus and took the AP exam. He got a 5, which is the highest grade you can get. The second year, he took the BC exam, which is not only the higher level of the exam, he was one of 28 kids in the United States who got a perfect score. But he got C's in calculus because his teacher zinged him because he wouldn't do the homework. And we just fought this battle constantly because he gets math. He has no common sense at all, but he really gets math, right? And we'd fight this battle constantly. I say, "Michael, you have to understand, it's a game." He said, "Dad, that's my point. It's their grade, not mine. What's important to you?" Right? And now, he graduated high school. He was in the United States a National Merit Scholar, which is a very high honor. He got into every Ivy League school that he applied to, right? He wasn't even ranked in the top 25% of his high school class, though, because he didn't care about homework, right? He just got these things. And so you have some kids who are like that. Their grades are deflated. Some are inflated. If that was put out, now teachers say we need to teach these kids responsibility, and I go along with them on that. And you could convince me that my kid acted in an irresponsible way. But you cannot convince me my kid deserves a C in calculus, not when he gets a perfect score on the AP exam. Of that I cannot be convinced. And so what this school is trying to do, which is so much to your advantage, is bring honesty and meaningfulness to the grades. To let you know those things in ways that can be interpreted and then ways that can be used. It's really the direction to go. We have ended the time we allotted this evening. But if you have other questions or concerns, I'll stick around and I'll be glad to talk to you about them. But we know you have other commitments and other responsibilities, so we don't want to use your time. We do want to thank you for being a part of this session tonight. And before we go, anything else you want to add?
Thank you, Dr. Guskey. I hope tonight really helped you understand a little more about grading practices, grades, et cetera, et cetera. I see a lot of nods. I want to also thank our teachers who are here this evening. We have several teachers who have come to listen to the presentation, so thank you guys for being here this evening. October 9th, we will be offering a evening where you can come in and look at your child's student portal and get a better idea of how to look at the information that's there. Dr. Guskey has shared that more is better because it informs you of where your students are in their learning progression. So we invite you to come back on October 9th for that. It'll be more of a hands-on type session where we're actually looking at the parent portal, and I believe we're going to have some computers set up where you can get on and log on to your students' portal and begin to make sense of our new standards-based report card. So thank you again for coming this evening. Dr. Miner, did you have anything else?
Well, I only wanted to add that Our teachers are all learners. All educators are continual learners as well. We have our half-day PD day tomorrow. School ends at noon. And our secondary teachers will be in session all tomorrow afternoon learning professional development, and also all day on Friday. So they're going to be continuing to work with Dr. Guskey and heads of department and senior leaders in this learning journey. So we're all excited for the next few days here, and we look forward to telling you more about what we learned on October 9th.
We want to partner with you, because what we know, what the research shows, is that when we partner together, your kids have a better outcome. And so we look forward to working with you to help you understand the standards-based report card, and you're learning along with us. We're all learners, and the day that we stop learning is a sad day for all of us. So thank you again for this evening.